He wiped grease off his hands and said nothing. That silence was his first mistake, because the quiet mechanic everyone laughed at once led men into rooms that don't exist on any map. In the next 10 seconds, a rich black belt was about to learn why real power never needs to speak first. Before we go further, if you're new here, hit subscribe. These are the stories nobody else tells, the quiet ones, the hidden ones, the men who carried more than anyone ever knew. You don't want to miss what happens next. He wiped the grease off his hands and said nothing. That was his first mistake, silence, to a man who'd never been told no in his life. The black belt sneered, flanked by 3 of his students, all watching the mechanic like he was something to be stepped over. "You don't even know how to make a fist," he laughed, loud enough for the whole garage to hear. What none of them knew, what no one in this town knew, was that the quiet man wiping down that old truck's engine had once given orders that decided whether men lived or died. Not in a dojo, not in a ring, in rooms with no cameras, no rules, and no second chances. His name wasn't important to them, but his hands had once held a rifle steady through a sandstorm, had pulled 3 wounded brothers out of a compound that was never supposed to be breached, had signed off on missions that still don't exist in any official record. He'd traded a command chair for a mechanic's stool because the war never really let him go, it just changed uniforms. And now, in this dusty garage, a rich man with a black belt and an audience was about to make the worst mistake of his life. Because some men don't fight for pride. They fight because they've been pushed past the last line, and this man was 3 seconds from crossing it. The wrench in his hand hit the workbench. Slowly he stood up, and for the first time all day, he looked the black belt directly in the eyes. What happened in the next 10 seconds would end up on someone's phone, go viral by nightfall, and destroy everything the black belt thought he knew about power. The garage went silent. Even the radio, playing some tinny pop song in the corner, suddenly felt too loud. The black belt students shifted on their feet. Something about the way the mechanic stood, calm, rooted, unreadable, didn't match the script they'd walked in expecting. This was supposed to be easy, a joke, content for their next video. We humiliated a random mechanic. But the man now walking toward them didn't move like someone who'd spent his life fixing transmissions. He moved like someone who'd once cleared rooms for a living. 3 years earlier, half a world away, this same calm had meant something very different. It meant a 12-man team trusted him with their lives on a rooftop in a city that doesn't appear on tourist maps. It meant knowing exactly how many seconds it takes for a situation to go from calm to catastrophic, and being the only one in the room who wasn't afraid of that math. "Say that again," the mechanic said quietly. Not a threat, a question, which, somehow, was worse. The black belt laughed it off, but his laugh cracked half a second too early, the kind of crack that comes from a man realizing the ground beneath him just shifted and he doesn't know why. His students noticed too. One of them slowly lowered his phone. Because there's a look. Veterans know it. Operators know it. Men who've stood in real violence know it. A stillness in the eyes that has nothing to do with anger and everything to do with certainty. The black belt had trophies, belts, followers. But the mechanic had something you can't win at a tournament. He had the kind of calm that only comes from having already survived the worst night of your life, and knowing this wasn't going to be it. The black belt took a step forward anyway. He had no idea he'd just triggered something he could never take back. The first move wasn't a punch. It was a question, sharp, quiet, almost gentle. Do you know what happens in the first 3 seconds of a real fight? The black belt blinked. He'd trained for years, trophies on a shelf, a wall of certificates, a following that called him sensei, like it meant something outside these 4 walls. But nobody had ever asked him that. Not like this, not with that voice. In a real fight, the mechanic continued, stepping closer, there's no bowing, no rules, no referee to stop it before someone gets hurt for real. One of the students actually took a step back. Something in his gut told him what his mind hadn't caught up to yet. This wasn't a man about to lose. The black belt swung. It was fast. Trained. Textbook. It never landed. What happened next took less time than it takes to read this sentence. A shift of weight, a redirect, and suddenly the black belt was on the ground, staring up at the garage lights, utterly unable to explain how he got there. Gasps, silence, a phone clattering to the floor. The mechanic didn't gloat. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply looked down and said 5 words that would end up quoted 1,000 times online by morning. That was just muscle memory. Because what none of them understood yet, what was about to unravel in front of the entire garage, was that this wasn't a fight. It was a memory, one that dragged him back to a night he'd spent 3 years trying to forget. A night that had nothing to do with dojos, and everything to do with the reason he now lived in silence. And someone in that garage was already recording. By tomorrow, this video wouldn't just go viral. It would reach someone who thought this man was dead. The video hit social media before the shop even closed that night. By morning, it had 1 million views. By noon, 10 million. Comments flooded in. Some laughing, some stunned, most asking the same question: who is this guy? Nobody in that garage knew the answer. But somewhere, on the other side of the country, a man named Reyes sat in his kitchen, coffee going cold in his hand, staring at his phone like he'd seen a ghost, because he recognized that stance, that stillness. That exact 5-word phrase, that was just muscle memory, was something he'd heard once before, whispered over a radio in the middle of a firefight, right before the man who said it pulled him out of a burning vehicle and carried him 400 meters under fire. Reyes hadn't seen his old commander in 3 years. Everyone on the team had been told he'd taken a medical discharge and disappeared. Some said he couldn't handle what happened that night in the compound. Others said he simply couldn't come back from it. Not the injuries, but the weight of the decision he'd made. The one that saved 6 lives and ended his career in the same breath. Nobody talked about what really happened that night. It wasn't in any report. It wasn't supposed to exist at all. Reyes picked up his phone and made a call he never thought he'd make again. "I found him," he said, voice shaking. "I found the ghost." On the other end of the line, silence. Then, "Are you sure? I'm watching him fight on my screen right now." Back at the garage, the mechanic had already gone home, unaware that the video was spreading like wildfire. Unaware that 3 former teammates who thought he was gone for good were now racing to find him. And unaware that the black belt, humiliated and furious, was already making calls of his own, trying to figure out exactly who had just destroyed his reputation in 9 seconds flat. 2 searches, 2 very different reasons. Only one of them would find him first. 3 days later, a black SUV pulled into the garage parking lot. The mechanic looked up from an engine block, wrench in hand, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt his chest tighten with something other than grief. The door opened. Reyes stepped out, older, a faint scar above his eyebrow that hadn't been there before, but unmistakably the same kid he'd once carried through smoke and gunfire. "You said you'd never let a man behind," Reyes said quietly. "So, why'd you disappear on all of us?" The mechanic set the wrench down slowly. His hands, the same hands that had thrown a black belt to the ground without breaking a sweat, were trembling now. "Because I couldn't look any of you in the eye," he said. Not after what I decided that night. What he'd never told anyone, not his command, not his team, not a single soul in 3 years, was that saving 6 men that night meant leaving 1 behind. A choice made in 4 seconds that he replayed every night since. He didn't come home a hero. He came home carrying a ghost that never left. Reyes shook his head. "You didn't leave anyone behind. He made it out 2 hours after you did. He's alive. He's been looking for you for 3 years. To say thank you." The mechanic didn't move, didn't breathe. 3 years of silence cracked open in a single sentence. Behind them, unnoticed, the black belt had pulled up too, trying to salvage his image, hoping to challenge the mechanic to a real rematch, on camera for content. He stepped out of his car just in time to hear the words that would humble him more than any takedown ever could. He watched a group of hardened men who'd survived things he could never train for, embrace a quiet mechanic like he was the most important man alive. No cameras needed this time. The black belt lowered his phone and for once said nothing at all. Because real strength was never about the belt on your waist. It was about the weight you carried in silence and the family that never stopped looking for you. The mechanic finally exhaled, 3 years of guilt lifting in one breath, surrounded by the brothers who'd never once given up on him. Some legends don't announce themselves. They just wait quietly until the truth finds them.